My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Today's first reading introduces us to a curious figure called Gamaliel, who only appears a couple of times in the New Testament. He doesn't do a lot, but what he does well. He reminds me also of another figure, Ananias, the one we read about in the Acts of the Apostles, the one told to baptize Saul, who will then become St. Paul. He's the good Ananias, so don't confuse him with the bad one, the one who tried to trick St. Peter and hold back money from the church together with his wife, and the two of them, man and wife, were struck down dead. But the good Ananias is, as I said, the one given the task of baptizing Paul almost immediately after Paul's conversion. We're told later that he was a devout man according to the law, well spoken of by all the Jews who lived in Damascus, and it was clear that he was an early convert to Christianity. God appears to him in a vision and says, "Rise and go to the street called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judas for a man of Tarsus named Saul, for behold, he is praying, and he has seen a man named Ananias come in and lay his hands on him, so that he might regain his sight." Ananias is understandably nervous about this, because Saul's reputation preceded him. Until then, he'd been the one breathing fire against the church, and as Ananias says to God, "Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much evil he has done to your saints at Jerusalem, and here he has authority from the chief priests to bind all who call upon your name." But God answers, "Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and kings and the sons of Israel." Ananias faithfully carries out his task, goes to Paul and baptizes him, and we never hear about him again. Well, Gamaliel is something similar. We also learn about him from the Acts of the Apostles. The high priest and his council don't know what to do with the apostles whom they've put in prison, but who are then miraculously released by an angel and went back to preaching, and then are brought before them. When Peter, not very diplomatically perhaps, tells the authorities that God has raised Jesus, whom you killed by hanging him on a tree, we're told that these were enraged and wanted to kill the apostles. One can understand them being a little bit upset. But then Gamaliel, who's a member of the council, intervenes, basically recommending caution. He gives various examples of recent Jewish independence movements against the Romans, which all came to nothing. And then he gives a very sensible piece of advice. "So in the present case, I tell you, keep away from these men and let them alone. If this plan or this undertaking is of men, it will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You might even be found opposing God." Well said, Gamaliel. Well, the authorities sort of listened to him on this occasion. They let the apostles go, though not without having given them a flogging first. Gamaliel appears on one other occasion, and like Ananias, it's linked to St. Paul. St. Paul tells us that he sat at Gamaliel's feet. In other words, that he was a student of Gamaliel. So Gamaliel taught Paul to love the law of God, to be zealous for it, and in his own way he helped prepare Paul to receive the call of Christ, albeit without knowing he was doing this. We do in fact know a little bit more about Gamaliel from non-biblical sources. We know, for example, that he was a Pharisee and a grandson of the famous Rabbi Hillel. Hillel was known for his more lenient view of the old law, in contrast to his contemporary Rabbi Shammai, who held a much stricter interpretation. Gamaliel is also mentioned by the Jewish first-century historian Josephus, who speaks about the nobility of his son. So Gamaliel was, as we would say in English, or at least in certain more upper-class circles, a good egg, or in other words, a good chap, or as they might say across the pond, a swell guy, a good fellow in a good family. And why do I talk about this? I do so, Jesus, because today's gospel teaches us to do the best we can, even though that best might be limited. Ananias did the best he could. He had a small role, and he fulfilled it. He wasn't called to be a church leader. Gamaliel didn't seem to receive the full grace to become a Christian. There's certainly no record of this. but he acted nobly and taught God's law well, following the lights he had received. And this was all part of God's plan of salvation. And in today's Gospel, Jesus and his disciples are faced with a hungry crowd of 5,000 men, not counting women and children. And we're told, lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that the multitude was coming to him, Jesus said to Philip, "How are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" And I love St. John's comment. This he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Jesus, you were totally in control. You always are. But you asked this question to help Philip and the other disciples appreciate just how limited they are and how inadequate any solution they could think of would be. First Philip and then Andrew expressed their inadequacy in the face of the problem. Philip answered him, 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they among so many?" And the other disciples don't even dare to open their mouths. Jesus, I can imagine you thinking, excellent, now you know how completely helpless you are. I'm going to get to work. And then he gets them to do something very simple, very basic. Get the people to sit down. How beautiful. And how often, Jesus, you treat us like that. There's not a lot you can do, so just do the tiny bit you can. I still remember a beautiful commentary on this episode by Pope St. John Paul II when he came to Britain and was speaking specifically to the young people of Scotland. And let's remember that St. Andrew is the patron saint of Scotland. Having described the scene, and Andrew referring to the boy with the barley loaves and the fish, the Pope said to his young listeners, and therefore to us today, the point I wish to make is this. St. Andrew gave Jesus all there was available, and Jesus miraculously fed those 5,000 people and still had something left over. It is exactly the same with your lives. Left alone to face the difficult challenges of life today, you feel conscious of your inadequacy and afraid of what the future may hold for you. But what I say to you is this. Place your lives in the hands of Jesus. He will accept you and bless you, and he will make such use of your lives as will be beyond your greatest expectations. In other words, surrender yourselves like so many loaves and fishes into the all-powerful, sustaining hands of God, and you will find yourselves transformed with newness of life, with fullness of life. So Pope St. John Paul II is telling us, as he told those young people in Scotland, you might not have a lot to offer to God, but if you offer that little, he will do great things. He can take 5 barley loaves and 2 fish and feed a crowd of over 5,000. And he can take your inadequacy and weakness, and mine, and do great things with them for souls. Now, God might be calling some of you to great and important roles in society, and if he is, it would be cowardice to settle for less. The church needs its Peters and its Pauls, and its saintly kings and queens, and saint statesmen like St. Thomas More. But it also needs lesser figures like all those people who supported St. Paul, and who are mentioned only in lists, or figures like Ananias or Gamaliel. We're not all called to be the lead actor, and having a minor role can also in its own way be very important, as anyone who knows about theatre will tell you. I love those words from T.S. Eliot's great poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. He writes, "No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Am an attendant lord, one that will do, to swell a progress, start a scene or two, advise the prince." Anyway, he goes on. Now, Prufrock, and this poem is written in the voice of Prufrock, is actually a rather weak and sad figure, and I'm not recommending him as a model. Indeed, he's an example of someone who settles for mediocrity. I'm not advising that, and you, Jesus, don't want this from us. However, it is good to accept that we don't have to have the lead role, but we do have to fulfill the role God gives us with fidelity, courage, and humility. The humility of Our Lady, who, though she was great, considered herself small, for God, she said, has looked upon the lowliness of his handmaiden. Holy Mother, if God wants us to be handmaids or servants, then help us to be happy to be so, knowing that by humbly accepting our littleness, He will do great things through us. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.